This is Sleep Fader, where mindfulness, music, stories, and sound design come together to remix your inner dialogue, bring down the stress levels, and dial in your best sleep. Hey, it's Jeff. Welcome back. Whether you're a first-timer or something of a regular now, I'm glad you're here. This is Act 1 of 3, The Lounge, the decompression zone. Take your time getting settled. Move if you need to move. Set the volume how you like it. Drink some water. Grab that extra blanket or turn up the AC. This is your time. Have it your way. You know, back in episode 2, I described these moments before sleep as a very special time in your day. And with each new episode, as more listeners find their way to the show, the more gratitude I feel for the opportunity to meet you all here for the sole purpose of unwinding the mind. Here in the lounge, I've talked about that conscious choice we all make. The setting of intention to shift from a busy doing mode to just being here, present and aware. And how with the simple act of trying to rest, we loosen the reins of control and open ourselves to change. I've also talked about the mechanics of music quite a bit. The way notes and chords work together to evoke feelings of tension and resolution. I've compared that to the ways our own thoughts can often do the same. Sharing these concepts here has helped me to craft a language around something I care very much about. Music and sound as a direct intervention for stress and racing mind. Music, like the breath, as a focal point for mindful, present moment awareness. So yeah, I'm grateful for this venue to put ideas into words. And again, I'm glad you're here for it. With that in mind, I'm going to do something a little different this time. A little less talking and a little more music before we get back into our story. Every episode of Sleep Fader is written, directed, and produced by yours truly, and I hope you like what you hear. If you do, please subscribe to Sleep Fader on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Stitcher, wherever you love to listen. Regulars will have noticed by now that I typically keep the music pretty simple, and the playback times short. That's quite intentional. This time, I'll share something with a few more parts and layers, and let it play a little longer. After a while, I'll start removing layers until I'm down to the last one. Follow along as best you can, maybe trying to notice when I make a change or remove a sound. And if your mind wanders while you listen, that's okay. Just take a slow, deep breath and return your attention to whatever's happening with the music. And I'll see you back here shortly. All right, I think we're ready to drop back into our story. Back into character, and back to that small port town where our story began. This time, I think I'm going to add a few layers, and we'll learn a little more about who we've been traveling with since that first day on Sunset Beach. Wherever we are, we're going somewhere eventually. There's always some other place waiting for us, even if we don't know it yet. Sometimes we set our destination. Sometimes it's set for us. Either way, instinct usually tells us when to resist and when to take a ride, as it has become my habit lately. I chose to take the ride. It was late on a Wednesday night when I found the invitation at my front door. I'd just reached the top of my driveway when my phone buzzed. A text from Art. I dismissed the notification, clocking the time as I swiped it away. It was late. I could get back to Art tomorrow. I was hoping to get to bed early for once. So much for that. My set had run late. Stage power can be a little iffy at times, and about halfway through a pretty decent performance of A Day in the Life, both the speakers and the spotlight started cutting in and out. Schmitty says the old bar and grill gets cranky in bad weather. I'm sure it doesn't help that both the PA and the lone spotlight are plugged into a cheap power strip, or that the power strip draws its juice through a long orange extension cord that snakes all the way up from the basement. Well, it might have been orange once. Now it's a dusty reptilian patchwork of old duct tape repairs. It had been a stormy evening, but the wind and rain hadn't kept the regulars away. With the tourists mostly gone in search of balmier beaches, us locals were eager to resume our off-season routines. From October through March, Wednesday nights means half-price drafts, enjoyed while hunkered into the familiar, cracked leather stools that surround Schmitty's horseshoe-shaped bar, overlooking the marina where half as many boats were moored as were the previous week, and almost no foot traffic on the boardwalk. Things were finally slowing down again, and that was just fine. We could count on good conversation with neighbors, and no competition for the restrooms. Plus, there was me, doing my thing on what passes for a stage around here. All said, not a bad deal. Despite the suspect extension cord, once the weather started cooperating, the old stage gear did too, and I was able to finish my set. A little later than expected, but I was glad to get the 2 full hours in. Not because Schmitty pays me for my services. He doesn't, unless you count a free plate of whatever Sheila has cooking on the grill that night. No, I stuck around because playing music for people, even though most of them are only half listening to my simple arrangements of dusty old FM radio tunes, it fills me up with something I need. Sometimes I feel like I should pay Schmitty for the privilege. But I've lost the thread, I think. I was talking about the invitation. I usually walk home from my gigs. Schmitty's is only a few blocks away, and my guitar travels easy on my back. The streets are very quiet at night, and if you ask me, there's no finer soundtrack for an evening walk than the ocean's resolute surge off in the distance. There's very little light pollution this far out, too. On a clear night, walking along moonlit sidewalks, with the sea's nocturnal murmuring in my ears and all the jewels of the night sky on full display, I can imagine our small beach town as an island, adrift under the shimmering constellations, a circle of sanctuary seafront, insulated from the chaos of the world. Tonight, however, was overcast and drizzly. The air was misty and cool, the moon only a pale hook in the sky. I was careful to move slowly down the slick, steep driveway leading to my cottage. The motion-activated floodlight at my porch picked me up halfway down the drive, illuminating the path as well as the package leaning up against my front door. Even from a distance, I could see it was a record album. Not an unusual item in my house, but still an unexpected find outside of it. I climbed the 2 wooden porch steps and picked it up. Pure white sleeve, no writing or picture, no shrink wrap. No evidence it had been handled by any kind of mail or delivery service. I tipped out the platter, balancing it between my thumb and ring finger. The grooves flashed in the bright light of the flood. I should say groove, really, because there appeared to be only a single long track on one side of the LP. The other side was completely flat and free of any markings. Very unusual. The round sticker at the center was white too, save for 2 characters, handwritten in black ink. A lowercase m and the number 7. Well, now I had some idea who had sent it, or at least where it had come from. So, I did what anyone with a turntable would do. I took it inside to play it. I'm not sure what I expected to hear when I dropped the needle onto the disc, but the full opening narration and theme song from Star Trek, the original series from the 60s, was the furthest thing from my mind. In retrospect, I suppose it was the sender's idea of a joke. Maybe the next time I see him, I'll suggest he leave a communicator badge for me to find. Anyway, it played through to the operatic climax, right up to that last high note, and then the needle stayed there, floating nice and easy in that long, continuous groove. I stood, staring down at the spinning record, watching the slight bob of the hovering tone arm, watching the spiraling texture reflect the moonlight that shone through my living room window, watching and waiting. For what? I didn't know. Slowly, almost hesitantly, a familiar drone began to fill the room. Mellow radio static, like white noise but warmer, more inviting. As the tone grew louder, I felt something shift within me, a sudden sharpening of my senses. Colors were more vibrant, and I could taste the salt of the sea breeze floating in through the open window. By contrast, my breath was deepening, slowing down. From above, a gentle warming light, as though a summer sun had materialized overhead. I felt this first as a band of soothing heat encircling my temples. Slowly, the light band moved over my cheekbones, down the slope of my nose, over my lips, and around the back of my neck, the shape of it conforming to the contours of my head. It moved deliberately, progressively over and around my shoulders, warming my back, my chest, and my biceps. By degrees, the light band moved downward, past my elbows, trailing tactile warmth, and a mild tingling as it passed over and through my hands at my sides, my hips, moving successively lower around my thighs, my knees, and down and around my calves, until coming to a rest at my ankles, where it hovered, warming my toes as the static tone droned on. For a while, I couldn't say for how long, I had lost myself. All thought was suspended in that swirling, sedative fuzz. Eventually, I opened my eyes, unsure of when exactly I had closed them. Where I had once been looking down at the spinning record, there was now a glass-topped cabinet filled with a collection of radios. Some were old transistors. Some looked more futuristic. And some were of unknowable origin. You might think such a strange transfiguration would come as quite a shock. But I've become more or less inured to this sort of displacement. My world has changed these last several months. My frequency modulated. By chance or by some design, I really can't say. In any case, I decided that, whatever was happening, it was probably temporary. And I'd stood at this counter once before, hadn't I? I'd done it the old-fashioned way the last time, but still. I felt safe enough. And this time, somehow, the Minor 7 Curiosity Shop had visited me. The shopkeep was nowhere to be seen, though his little radio was standing atop the glass case, issuing its steady stream of noise. I was, evidently, removed from my home. And yet, looking down at the shop's polished hardwood floor, I could still feel the familiar weave of the living room rug beneath my bare feet. I scanned the room from where I stood, hesitant to move. I didn't want to disrupt or break the enchantment that had brought me here. The radios, arranged neatly beneath the glass. A silver Panasonic with a nylon wrist strap. Very similar to one I had as a boy, caught my eye. Next to this, another radio. Or something like a radio, anyway. It was about the size of a deck of cards. Compact but solid looking, with a dark metal case and a copper-colored speaker grill. There were no dials, just a row of what looked like old-fashioned typewriter keys across the top. The symbols printed on the keys were abstract to me. There was no antenna, and this aberrant contraption just didn't look like it came from a place where Wi-Fi was a thing. Behind the counter was a large wall of framed items that I'd somehow missed during my last visit. Like the artifacts crowding the tall shelves that framed the room, The collection on the wall didn't much want to be seen. A casual glance showed only simple rectangles of various sizes, neatly arranged. I inhaled slowly, focused my gaze, and with that, an eclectic gallery of photos, oil paintings, watercolors, and drawings slipped into conspicuous view. The photography was stunning, crystal clear portraits of jazz musicians, taken in pre-jazz age settings with high-resolution equipment that hadn't been invented yet. One large print featured a young Louis Armstrong, every fiber of his dark, woolen bird's-eye jacket in sharp relief, the cyan and yellow print of his tie radiating color. Louis is flanked by Duke and Eddie Lang, who, strumming on a parlor guitar, sits with them at a small cocktail table perched on a dusty-looking hillside. Beyond them in the distance, the second Giza pyramid appears to be under construction. The oils were equally intriguing. They were quite large, incredibly detailed, and looked as cracked and aged as the photos looked new. And yet the scenes rendered there were unlike any places I've seen on Earth, or in dreams for that matter. I wasn't entirely surprised to discover that the pencil sketch I'd left with the shopkeep during my last visit had been neatly framed and centrally displayed at eye level. It occurred to me that the placemat drawing had originated from none other than Schmitty's Seaport Grill. I still didn't know much about the artist, beyond her taste in cocktails. But I know she left that drawing for me to find, and that I was supposed to deliver it here to the shopkeep. There was a note wedged into the lower right corner of the frame, written on a familiar-looking paper tag. I leaned slowly, carefully, over the counter to make out the handwriting. It said simply, "Tomorrow, early morning. Pack light. Expect a long ride." I didn't question whether or not this message had been left for me. As I said, I've become accustomed to this sort of thing. Still no sign of the shopkeep, only the radio on the countertop filling the silence with its perpetual fizz. And still, I could hear the waves breaking on the beach about 100 yards from my back porch. I reached across the countertop to pull the note from the frame, and instead found myself holding the green and white striped leaf of the spider plant that sat on the shelf above my turntable. No dizziness, no disorientation, no sense of anything having changed at all, really. At the turntable, the tone arm hovered and bobbed, having reached the end of the track. I lifted it gently and placed it back in its cradle. I was home again, for the time being anyway. After that, I decided I wasn't quite finished with my guitar for the night. So I picked up the case and carried it out back, where I could sit for a while and try not to think too hard about where I might be traveling tomorrow, or how, or with whom. That I would be going somewhere was never in question. But that's so often the case, isn't it? There was a pretty good stretch of scrub and rocks between me and the sand, and a fair amount of sand to traverse if I'd been inclined to dip my toes. The tide was coming back in, though. While I lay sleeping, the sea would rise by nearly 11 feet, narrowing the gap considerably. By early tomorrow morning, the tide would be out again. So far out that even the biggest waves would appear as small ripples on the horizon. I plucked a quiet melody, scanning the rolling seascape, and thinking about big waves that, from a distance, were hardly noticeable at all. I strummed a few gentle chords, wondering anyway, how does one pack light for a long trip? I experimented some more, arranging the chords together with the melody, looking deep, way out to the horizon, allowing my focus to soften until the sea and sky merged together too. After a while, I set my guitar down on top of the closed case, closed my eyes, and just listened to the ocean's incoming surge. Resolute, peaceful, no more in control of its destination than I would be come the morning. Ripples on the horizon, or breakers at the shore. Wave upon wave. Who was I to resist?